Psychology is the new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behaviors so you won't click. No complicated code, just tried and true brain science at play. Social engineering for good, the best defense is in your mind today.
Hello and welcome to Phishing for Answers, where the carrot beats the stick and we flip the script on the bad guys, turning humans from easy targets into the strongest line of defense.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast belong solely to the hosts and guests and don't necessarily reflect those of their employers or sponsors. We're seasoned security professionals, but this is a conversation, not a custom consultation. Need specific guidance? Reach out to Joshua Crumbaugh directly.
Get ready. Phishing for Answers starts right now.
Hello and welcome to another episode. Today, I'm very excited to have Walt Powell with us. He is the lead Field CISO over at CDW and has had an extraordinary career. Walt, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So lead Field CISO just means that I'm a recovering CISO who leads a team of former CISOs who now exist in a pre-sales capacity to do advisory and consulting work for CISOs who are sitting in the seat, somebody who's sat in that seat and understands the pain that comes along with doing that. I've been at this a long time. So I started off teaching networking and security at a university, and I switched over to private education and started teaching CISSP boot camps way back in the olden days. And that's how I got involved with ISC squared. And I think they call themselves ISTC2 now. That's how old I am. I'm part of the exam development committee. And so if you've ever tried to get a CISSP and said, what idiot would write these test questions? I'm part of the team of idiots that writes those test questions. I've been every kind of thing you can be. I've been every kind of practitioner, every kind of seller. I've been a CISO. I now do this lead Field CISO thing, and I've written a couple of books. I wrote a book on next generation security leadership called the CISO 3.0. And I dropped a book this year in February about post-quantum cryptography called Quantum Ready, which is an interesting kind of cutting edge topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Did I see something about how you used to be in a rock band or something?
Yeah. So it was a very interesting journey into IT. I went to college for like 1 year and then dropped out to go on tour with my ska punk sublimey kind of band. And we did that for a while until the road ran out on that. We toured with 311 and some other interesting bands, and it was really fun. But then when that dried up, it was like, what am I going to do? I need to go get a real grown-up job. But I was covered in tattoos, and at the time I still had hair, and I had wild hair. I was like, what job can you do looking like that? And the answer back in the day was IT guy, right? Like you could be an IT guy, look crazy. So I remember to being a kid when I used to like to hack stuff and mess around with the public phone system and things like that. And I was like, this seems like a real fit for me. And that was how I ended up, not in just IT, but in security. I'd had a long history as a child of breaking stuff.
Very cool. Okay, so one of the things when doing my research ahead of the podcast that I saw that you talk a lot about is about being able to communicate to the board. And one of the things, this entire podcast is devoted to the human element of cybersecurity. And so often that focuses around not clicking on phishing, emails or links in emails or opening attachments, but there's so much more to it. And so why don't we just start there at sort of the, that social role of the CISO and understanding how to be able to communicate to the the board and the C-suite?
Yeah, so it's funny in my book, I lay out. It's called the CISO 3.0 because I lay out this premise that there have been iterations, versions of the job of CISO, and in the early days,
see that, yeah.
yeah, in the early days, in the early 2000s, it was enough to just like understand what a firewall was or what URL filtering was, and that made you the smartest person in the room, and you became the main security guy. A lot of the time, though, that job was very tools based. It was very technical. There was a lot of firefighting, a lot of like trying to close tickets and manage access and things like that. As we moved into the 2010s, we started to call the job strategic, but at that point, it still wasn't really strategic. It was still very tactical. We were taking outside inputs to prove compliance, right? So, do we have the controls we need based on this framework or based on this customer questionnaire, or based on the thing that the cyber insurer is telling us to do? We started to report into executives, but oftentimes still weren't seen as a true C-suite executive, right? It's very common for me to see CISOs who don't even get the CISO title. They end up with a VP title or a manager or director type title. Because we haven't sounded like the other folks in the C-suite. Imagine you walk into a boardroom and the CEO's in there talking about how we're impacting revenue and the future of the company, and the CFO comes in and talks about the balance sheet, and even the CRO who's coming in and talking about risks is talking about risks from a business-centric point of view. And then we come in and we talk about how many vulnerabilities we found and closed this month, and we just don't sound like the other folks. And if you imagine a CFO who came in and talked that same way and said like, oh, I can't tell you what last quarter's numbers were, but I can tell you they were up green arrow. Well, that's what we do all the time. And so consequently, we haven't sounded like the other C's. And so we have been relegated into, even a lot of the time when I see CISOs get the C title, they report up through some other C level. They report up through the CIO. They get their messages to the board brokered through the CEO or whoever. And we get treated as kind of like second-class C citizens. But that's partly our own fault because we haven't done a good job of communicating security in business terms. And that's really the secret, is we have to speak the language of business, and we have to align our security program to the business. But that's a thing you hear all the time. Like if you've read any security books or been to any security conferences, I'm sure you've heard speak the language of business and align your program to the business. But nobody ever tells you how to do that, right? Like nobody ever says what that means. Like what even is the language of business?
So, to me, it's a lot about talking risk. So, you know, what is cybersecurity there for? We manage risk.
Absolutely.
Really, we don't even manage it as much as we advise on it. I mean, there's elements we manage and there's elements we advise on. And I think that that's another element. But I don't mean to interrupt. Continue.
You nailed it. That's exactly it. And you'll see it all the time. You'll see these situations where you have some legacy operating system that's running in production, and you go to the business line owner and say, hey, we need to do something about this. And he'll say something to the effect of like, I accept the risk. Well, it's like, A, you don't even know what the risk is. You're accepting a vulnerability and not a risk. And why are you the owner of the risk? I'm probably not even the owner of the risk. The business is the owner of the risk. We should be putting it on them to decide whether or not we accept that level of risk. And that's the thing that happens all the time. And it's a miscommunication, right? So when I talk in the book about what are the languages of business, I kind of lay out 4 languages that include finance, understanding the balance sheet, understanding cash flows, all those kind of things. We have to understand the value that's created. Can you become best friends with the CFO and figure out like when and where and how is value created in your business, right? It's different depending on every business, like depending on who owns you. Some public companies are trying to pump up stock prices, and some are trying to maximize dividends, and some are trying to hit an EBITDA target so that they can hit an earnings per share target. But when we get into private companies, it gets even more interesting, right? Like if you're PE owned or VC owned, and where are you in that cycle, and how are they trying to get their money back? Some of them are focused strictly on growth and don't care if you make money. Some of them are trying to reduce spend. So what creates value for your business, and how can you align your program to those values, right? So when I talk to people about like, how do you talk to the board? If I only had 3 slides, if I had to walk into a board meeting right now and I could only have 3 slides, those slides would be, how do I impact revenue? How do I impact cost? How do I impact risk? And risk seems like a no-brainer for CISOs, right? It seems like the kind of thing, like we talk about this all the time and we should be good at it. But unsurprisingly, maybe, we're not as great at talking about risk as we think we are generally. A lot of the time. I agree. Yeah, a lot of the time we're talking IT risk and not business risk. And a lot of the time we're conflating threats and vulnerabilities and exposures with risk, right? We'll create a risk register and put ransomware at the top of the list. And ransomware is not the risk. Ransomware is the threat, right? Yeah. So we have to convert that into what's the actual business risk. Is it a bottom line cost risk? Is it an operational impact risk? Is it I hate reputational risk. I'm not a big believer in it, but that's one of the possible levers we could hit on.
You know, I don't often see people going out of business or even having people boycott them because they had a breach. Like, I mean, yeah. I wish that consumers demanded a little bit more, but I don't see it. So
I hear a lot of people talk about reputational risk, and I'm just not a big believer in it for all those reasons. So if you look at the biggest breaches, the most headline breaches, things like Target, no one stopped shopping at Target. People are just used to getting a new credit card and moving on, right? And when you look at those, the Target, Home Depot, PF Chang's, and even more recent healthcare breaches and stuff, people don't even stop going to healthcare providers because they had massive breaches.
No, they don't.
In my hometown, our local hospital got horrifically owned. It was down for weeks and had to ship people off to other hospitals to get care, and no one stopped going to the local hospital.
So I have to interject. In my hometown, same thing, but it happened 3 times in the course of 6 months. And every time I'm just like, wow, you guys sure you don't want some help? Like, it seems like you need some help.
Right. And so when you look at the stock value, like the stock values take a short-term hit, but when you look at them a year later, they're right back up normal, right? So I don't believe there's real long-term reputational damage for most folks for breaches, with the exception of folks that are maybe in the security space. Like, I think things were pretty bad for SolarWinds, right? Like,
well, I mean, fair enough, but LastPass is still doing decently well. Did they really take the hit they should have? Now, if you look into that, I think it was, more the business that caused that risk than the cybersecurity company themselves. But, PE or not, you still can't have that breach.
Right. So reputational risk is just one of those things that is not real in my mind. However, where the real impact is when you look at what happened. They do take a short-term stock dip, usually like right in the news cycle. And it's that strategic impact. It's that we had to pay for this breach recovery or whatever. And where did that come from? Did it come off the balance sheet? Did it come out of free cash flow? What happened to that stock dip? What were we doing in that window? Were we going to do an M&A and buy a new company and potentially derail that? Or were we going to buy a new widget maker that was going to make us millions of dollars, and now we can't because we had to pay the IR firm or whatever? It's that strategic risk that I think is really the risk. It's that short-term impact. But yeah, I'm not sure I believe in long-term reputational risk from cyber. I just don't see it.
I agree. Now, real quick, before we do segue to a different topic, I do want to point out that I argue the CISO actually has, aside from the CEO, the most social role in the company, because the CISO has to go out and win over everybody. I mean, you can try and roll with an iron fist, but how's that going to work when, you know, the CFO and the COO both think they're above you in the chain of command? It's better to win people over, work with them, and like you said, make best buddies out of the CFO.
100%. And it's such a hard job because the whole thing is about building culture, right? We have to build a culture of security. You have to get everybody to be security minded and to think about security. And a lot of the time people view security as the office of no, or a hassle, or a thing that we bolt on after the fact. And we have to get past that mindset. And
that was because of the CISO 1.0 mentality.
Right. And even a little bit the 2.0 mentality where we're consuming all these external inputs, right? We have to do this, we have to do that, instead of looking at like, what is our risk and why are we doing this? What enables our business? How can we use security to enable the things that we want to do, is the 3.0 mindset. And there's still a lot of folks that aren't there, right? So I laid out 1.2.3 as a historical set of factors, but people still operate in that all the time. I still run into CISOs who are operating like 1.0s or 2.0s, and somewhere in between is also fair. I run into a lot of guys who I ask them like, hey, where do you think you are? And they're like, I think I'm a 1.5. Like, that's totally legitimate. But you're right. That office of no stuff comes from that old version mentality.
Well, and I think it's when you're heavily policy driven. Like I get the GRC is a very critical role, but in my opinion, I've really had the opportunity to talk with a lot of CISOs, in part because of this podcast. And one thing that sort of stood out to me is that you've sort of got two different types of CISOs out there. Well, three by your argument, but mine, I would say two different types of CISOs. One that focuses entirely on checking boxes, and then the other that focuses more on just, we're going to do the best that we can and put best practices or leading practices out everywhere we can. And it seems to me that the person that they can both have an equal amount of compliance, but the one that focuses on checking the box will spend all of their time checking the box, whereas the one that focuses on best practices will spend less of their time checking the box. And they tend to have little bit better results. And from what I've seen.
And I run into folks all the time who tell me like, hey, I struggle to get budget and buy-in. And a lot of the time, the struggle for budget and buy-in is because we're going in and we're telling a box checking story, right? Like, hey, I need more money to check this box. And the question then becomes like, why do I need to check this box? Could I check this box for less money? Is this a box worth checking? As opposed to going in and telling a story that is, this is the value in our risk reduction, right? Like you have a $100 million risk exposure. How much of that would we like to buy down? How much would we like to transfer to someone else? How much do we want to accept? How are we going to finance that acceptance? Like, that's a totally different way to talk to the board than most people are talking to the board today.
Completely agree. Okay, so pivoting just a little bit here, let's talk vibe coding for a little bit.
Sure.
Because I saw you wrote an article on it. And vibe coding is one of those things to me that, well, it's the future. But I come from an ethical hacking background, spent much of my career doing application penetration testing for the federal. And what stood out to me, I guess, was when I started looking at apps that had been vibe coded, they were head and shoulders above the human coded apps that in terms of security. What's been your experience and what are your thoughts there? And I'm not saying that vibe coding can't do terrible things. We all saw the news about Claude. But I think a little bit of this, it goes back to the human element, even if you're having AI in there. But what are your thoughts on vibe coding?
So there's two kinds of vibe coders in our organization, right? There's the traditional development folks who have now moved to Claude Code, Codex, Cursor, something like that. I talk a lot times to folks, and I've heard recently that that some of these developers are saying it's been 90 days since they've been in their IDE because those days are over, which is very interesting. But they still have access to the CI/CD pipeline. They still have the ability to build out applications in a way that has a life cycle that can be managed, and we can find bugs and fix them, et cetera, and create tickets and the whole 9 yards. There's a case to be made for how do we control that, because we've seen vibe coding accidentally delete entire databases. We've seen vibe coded apps that went in and stole resources from other departments. We've seen all kinds of interesting things in the news. And so we have to make sure that we're not in the news around that. But I feel like that level of vibe coding is the future. The scary level of vibe coding is what we call citizen developer, right? And that's now where like every project manager can just go out and code his own project management software. And we're seeing a lot of folks do that.
And they're probably not paying attention to what models they're using. I mean, because every developer I know, they're very specific and particular about what models they will use and they won't use.
Exactly.
Whereas I imagine you don't see as much of that in, like you said, the citizen development.
Right. And they have some background in what development should look like, and they can review the code and understand what they've built. And the citizen developers often have no idea what they built. They roll these things out, they become production software. That production software has no life cycle, no ownership. If that person leaves or whatever, who owns that? How do we maintain it going forward? If we need to make changes to it, how do we do that? And then oftentimes they don't have the development or security background to make sure that they've done things correctly or securely. And so citizen development is the scary part of vibe coding, right? And that's the part where how do we get our hands on around just everybody can vibe code an app now. And then where do we host that stuff? How do we manage it? You can go out to Replit and build an application, but then how do you host that application? And does it have your business's information in it or your client's information in it? And how do you manage that? It's a lot different than traditional development where we have a runtime environment, right?
Yeah.
It's the scary part of the vibe coding world.
Well, you're right. I mean, I think it is the CI/CD pipeline that is largely what helps to ensure it. I mean, the AI itself, I think, is most good models are trained on OWASP top 10. So by default, they're going to take security into consideration. But there's, I'm sure, a lot of models out there that aren't so much trained on that. But we also have other mechanisms. Like I don't know of anyone who's allowing vibe coding on a development side of things that isn't also having an AI come back through and do a security review,
right,
and a QA review and all of that. And so I think that's a really, really important part of it. And you're right. How do they host it? Where are they going to host it? And I imagine a lot of people are not finding or setting it up the right way or doing it in the right way. I mean, I think that's one of the big things that we've seen a lot of. There's been that dating app that exposed all of their user profiles and whatnot. And so we've definitely seen some interesting stuff there. Okay, so I any other opinions on vibe coding before we move on?
Yeah, a little bit. So even that, how do you mention like, hey, most people are having an AI come back and do some kind of security pass, but even how are we doing that is becoming more and more interesting. So with the release of Mythos, right? Mythos can go and find all kinds of vulnerabilities that weren't discoverable for years and years and years by humans, right? And most of us don't have access to Mythos because it's gated behind Project Glasswing. So if you're creating applications, if you're creating code bases, how are you scanning those code bases? What are you using to scan those code bases? Claude released Claude Code Security that you can get access to, but you have to go apply and get access to it. And it's built on Opus 4.6 and not Mythos even. So is it going to be as robust? Who knows? But how are we doing those reviews is going to be really important. in the very near future, in this world where frontier models allow everyone, good guys and bad guys, to do on-demand vulnerability discovery and then eventually immediate exploitation development, like it's going to take more than I just ran it against another model to look for vulnerabilities. We're really going to have to like understand how we're doing vulnerability management inside of these applications.
Well, yeah. And I think the other side of all of this on AI, I guess, moving a little bit away from vibe coding, but it does change vulnerability management. We've got new vulnerabilities we never had before. Did you see that latest prompt injection that used Morse code? It's it's a whole new world in terms of exploiting these apps and defending these apps at the same time. And I think too often we're not engineering them in a way that, or architecting them rather, in a way that they are, security first. And I think that's really one of the areas that AI breaks down the most. Is it's not as good at the architecture. It's great at the engineering, but not so great at the architecture.
Agreed.
Well, I don't know. It's pretty good at architecture, but that's when it's asked to think about architecture. If it's just vibing, I don't think it thinks about architecture a whole lot.
For sure. And especially when you get into those citizen developers, they have no idea what the architecture should look like. And they just are trusting this model did it right? And they have no understanding of what they've created and no way to maintain it going forward.
Now, what's the difference between a graph and relational database again?
Right.
All right. Okay, so pivoting just a little bit here. I am really, really big on carrots and just making people want to be more secure. And I've actually developed this or have this open project called Social Engineering for Good. Now, I bring this up because there is this formula for behavior change, and it is B equals map. B is behavior, and what it says is if we want to achieve behavior change, by the way, it came out of Stanford's behavioral science laboratory by a guy named BJ Fogg, and it says that if we want to achieve behavior change, we've got to have motivation. We've got to have ability, and we've got to have prompting. And so I think often we focus on motivation quite a bit. I hear a lot of talks about motivation, a little less so ability, but you do still see the occasional talk that'll focus in on how when you make cybersecurity the easiest option, it becomes the default option and you get better adoption and all of that. But I don't see as much on the prompting side of things because what it says is even when you have motivation and ability, if you don't prompt them, if you don't remind them about it constantly, they're going to forget and it's going to go to the back of their mind and you're not going to get that behavior change. And so I haven't seen a lot on prompting, but I just wanted to sort of bring that out, and I'm sure that gave you some thoughts, and just sort of see or ask you what are your thoughts on the equation in whole, but more specifically, or as a part B to the question, what should we be doing to better prompt our users?
Sure. So I talk in the CISO 3.0 book a good deal, especially in the I talk about it in the board level communication chapter, but there's also a chapter where I talk about like how do we build a culture and how do we do behavioral modification and stuff to help people build that culture. But I talk a lot about like how people learn in the book, and in the book it's about like how do we communicate to the board and how do they learn. But this is true for everybody. Like the way the human brain works very much is repetition. We learn through repetition. We learn through pattern recognition. We hands-on. When we take in information, we take it in along the kind of triune brain model, right? Where you think like, hey, we have a lizard brain, we have a monkey brain, we have a human brain. That's been debunked a little bit, but concept behind it is still valid about how you plug into people's attention. And that idea that we have to earn attention, and attention is a short, finite, valuable commodity. And like, how do we capture and gain attention is very important. And it's all about training folks, whether you're training the board on the message that they should be hearing over and over and over, or you're training your end users on the message that they should be hearing to become part of the culture. It's a lot about repetition and training, right? How do we help people learn? And that is part of it. And that whole carrot stick thing, I'm constantly surprised at how often I still hear people trying to take a stick approach. So just last week,
I know. I mean, the 3 strikes and you're out policy is still a very real thing.
Right. Just last week, I was at a conference and I was at lunch talking to a guy, and he was talking about he needed to implement his 3 strikes and you're out policy because of how poorly people were doing on their phishing. And I was like, that's the totally wrong approach. You're not going to build a culture of security, and you're not going to get people to want to bring things to you and report when they see things that are odd, when they're scared that they're going to be in trouble. Like, it just doesn't work that way. Well, that's not how you build a culture.
Well, and there's this thing called learned helplessness when you're too harsh on people, when you try and get the gotcha to make them fail. Somebody that was very confident in their ability to spot a scam, after they fall for too many phishing attacks in the wild, can all of a sudden be like, oh, I guess I'm not. And all of a sudden their attitude changes and their performance changes along with their attitude.
And sometimes it's just human nature, right? Like, sometimes fishes get you. Like, it just happens.
Well, and it's timing. I mean, there's billions of fish being sent every day. They're going to get perfect timing on you every once in a while.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I've had it happen to me a couple of times as an expert in the field who's taught phishing security classes and stuff. It just happened to me last week. I was in an airport. I was in a hurry. I was on my phone. I got an email. It was branded for my company. It said, your company has partnered with OpenAI, which it totally has. I just done OpenAI training. I've been getting a bunch of emails about OpenAI, and it said, your company's partnered with OpenAI and you have access to this new thing or whatever. Click here to get your access. And I clicked it, and it was like, haha, you've been phished. And I was like, oh man, you got me. And then I had to go take the training, and it was annoying, but I was like, it happens. It happens to everybody. It happens to security experts who talk about this every day.
Yeah, no, I mean, it happened to me just last week, a similar type of thing. But I think that's another key point, is that I most of the time hear security people say, I've never clicked on one. You can't get me. And I think it's important for the security team to lead with their stories. Hey, it can happen to me. It can happen to anyone. It's nothing to feel bad about, because I truly think that the best measure of culture is that report rate. And if we're not constantly encouraging people to tell us about any threat that they see, then we don't have a good measurement of our culture.
I couldn't agree more. It's the reporting is so much more important than the fail rate. And
yes, that's what we need to be measuring, the success rate.
Report.
Yeah. So we are almost out of time here. One question I love to ask everybody, and we'll probably wrap up or close to wrap up with this, is, what are your pet peeves? Anyone that's been in this field for a while, they've developed some pet peeves, any that you care to share with us?
So I feel bad because I don't know what they are, and I thought about it. And in the lead up to this, we talked a month ago or whenever, when we set this conversation up, and you told me you were going to ask me this question. It's the only question that you told me you were going to ask me, and I still don't know the answer. So I over the years, I've had a lot, and the deeper I get into it, the more I find I have to let them go. And every time I find that I have one, I find that it's more my problem than anybody else's, and it's up to me to figure out how to let it go. But if I had pet peeves, some that I've had over the years have a lot to do with how other people react, how other people behave, how other people interact. And I'll tell you, one of the things that's really hard in the job that I'm in now is I've moved from being the CISO to being a CISO advisor. And so I went from being the guy who set the strategy and determined what was going to happen to being an input, right? And so now I tell people like, hey, you ought to do this. Like, this is the right thing to do. This is the strategic move. This is the best path forward, etc.
And then they ignore you.
They ignore you. And sometimes they ignore you. Sometimes their leadership ignores them, right? And they're just like, you're not getting budget or buy-in for that. And it's hard to swallow sometimes to go back to places and show up 6 months or a year later and be like, we already had this discussion. Why are you still having this problem?
That's honestly why I founded a company and got out of penetration testing, was that I tailgated in off the same guy 4 years in a row at the same company. He was in the report every year. There was nothing changing. And I was just like, okay, what am I doing here? Is it just a game of gotchas, or are we actually trying to improve stuff?
Pen testing is so hard. You have to draw a box around it, because what I tell people is like, the pen tester is always going to get you. Like, you're never going to have a pen test that ends with, we didn't get you. It's just like, how far did they have to go? How difficult was it for them? They're always going to get you. So what's the value of that sometimes, right? If I find 4 years in a row you tailgated the same guy, what's the value of that finding, and how do I do something about it? I don't know sometimes.
I do think that it's a lot to culture. I mean, it's the thing that I'm always talking about, is that we have to build a culture of security. And when it's the thing that everybody talks about all the time, when it's just part of the culture, you don't have as many of those issues. I'm not saying that they never happen. I think the pen test is great because it reminds people, but it only reminds people if you use it as an educational experience instead of just keeping it as a document only the board reads.
Exactly.
So, well, we are out of time. Any just closing words for the audience?
Yeah. So, look at your business through that business lens. Understand what drives value for the business, what drives value for your CFO. Like, how does your CFO get bonused, right? Like, if you can understand that, it's very easy to start figuring out that, how do you align your program to the business, right? Like, what can I do that helps my CFO get bonused? If I pick the thing that's heavily CapEx, does it help him hit his EBIT target that helps him hit his earnings per share target that gets him bonused? Like, that is the differentiator. That is when I said, like, nobody tells you how to speak the language or how to do the alignment. That is the secret sauce, right? Like, how do we speak business risk and not just IT risk? How do we take that view and be a business enabler and not just a business blocker, right? One takeaway, that's the secret sauce to me.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for taking time to join me today. This has been a fabulous episode. Thank you, everyone, for joining us remotely, and have a great day.